Keandre, welcome back to the show. Congrats on 50K, man. How you feeling?
Hey man, appreciate it. Feel good. It's always good to reach some milestones like that. Good to be back on your show, of course, as well.
Always appreciate you having here. Since we last talked, we got some new information about who will be drafting number one, right? We got the Atlanta Hawks. How does that, in your own mind, change the conversation around the number one pick?
Yeah, I mean, every year the whoever gets the ultimate number one pick is always gonna kind of shape the conversation in a lot of ways, but especially in a class like this where it's more wide open. Obviously, when you got a guy like Victor Wembanyama, it doesn't anybody could get that first pick. But yeah, even like when we go back to like Paulo and Chet, whoever got that first pick or second pick, it was gonna kind of dictate where it goes. But with the guys like Alex Sarr and Zachary Rizashea, Ron Holland, everybody in between, kind of having a lot of different skill sets, that shapes it a lot. And especially a team like Atlanta that has two all-star caliber guards and has a lot of directions that they could go in this offseason. It definitely makes it really interesting, especially the order after that too.
And you like Sarr at one.
I do like Sarr one. He's been the guy for me.
So let me ask you this, Keandre. I mean, it's the weak draft. We could talk about that. Is it a weak draft? Is it not a weak draft? But who's the guy that you look like? Who's the guy that you look at that could surprise everyone and become a generational talent?
Generational, that's tough. I think when you see those guys that kind of become that exceed expectations in a lot of different ways that we didn't necessarily see coming, um, it's hard to kind of project who that will end up being. Even like a guy like Jalen Williams on the Thunder, I think a lot of us felt like he was a really good player and he kind of had that late rise, but being a near all-star caliber player in year two is not something that we could necessarily see. So I don't know. I don't really have an answer for that, just based off of what they've shown so far. But I do think, into your point of like this being a weak draft or whatever, I think that it obviously doesn't have the type of talent that we would necessarily see as being potentially all-stars. And I kind of go back to the point of the lack of creators like towards the top and guys that can be like real big time playmakers and obviously have some size with them and stuff too. Um, but yeah, so that's what kind of makes it difficult to project who that guy could be. But I think that there's a lot of guys with talent and um, if we just go by the numbers history wise, we're going to get all stars. We're going to get guys who go into situations who get the opportunity to show what they can do. And that's going to be better than Lou Dort or whoever else people want to throw out as the people that they would trade for the number one pick. That's just ridiculous, in my opinion.
So, I mean, every time you come on, we talk about Bronny because the people want to hear about Bronny. As I said, there was new information about the Atlanta Hawks drafting number one, and there's new information about Bronny because he was in the combine. He got to play 5-on-5. You know the weird thing about 5-on-5, Keandre? I felt like it was only like 2 years ago that they added 5-on-5. It's been like 10 years already. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
crazy.
it's
It's
it
crazy.
is.
But what did you learn about Bronny James as a prospect during this combine process?
Yeah, the big thing I just wanted to see from him is just kind of getting out there. That was the first thing. It's just being able to get out there and compete was the number one thing I wanted to see. He did that, and then outside of that, I didn't really learn anything new. To be honest, like I knew what he could do defensively. We know the type of shooter that he can be. He did really well in the drills, knocked down some shots on day two, and then we also know the kind of struggles that he has in terms of being a lead guard right now or just kind of commanding the team as a point guard. He's more of an off guard type of guy. And so I didn't really learn anything new. It was good to see him be able to do it against that type of competition, given the season that he had at USC this year. And then also test really well in the other results, the 40-inch vertical plus 6 wingspan or something like that. So that was good to see too.
He's not an NBA player right now, but I think he will become one. And it's interesting to hear everybody's conversation about the topic because they just keep talking about how he's not an NBA player right now. And then you hear other people saying he's not a prospect, but Bronny James will play in the NBA, so therefore he is an NBA prospect.
Yeah, I think the disconnect is those who didn't get to see him before the whole heart situation and just going off of USC because we're just going off of what he did last season. It's obvious. Like, of course, that guy wouldn't be a prospect now. I think you could still see the potential, and he flashed it at certain times during the year. But to say just going off of that, I think that would be a little ridiculous. But knowing what we've seen in the past from him and being a McDonald's All-American, that was no fluke. He hung in with those guys. He played. He contributed for several years in high school and made that leap as he went into his senior year, in terms of like doing a little bit more creating and things of that nature and just growing physically. So I think that I would have liked to see him go to college one more year and kind of get his bearings and be able to do different things with the ball. But, given he's going to kind of go through the NBA process, I think that as long as he lands in the right situation and they're patient with him, the potential is still there.
Yeah, I mean, he is an NBA prospect. Like we hear people relaying messages from anonymous NBA scouts that he's not a prospect, but I don't think that's right.
Yeah, I mean we've talked about it for a few years.
Yeah,
I've kind of remained the same thing. We can go way back like 2 3 years ago. I've been saying the
right.
same exact things the entire time. So I think it's pretty cut and dry on what his path is to ultimately get to the NBA, and he knows it too. Like he mentioned guys like Davion Mitchell, and I've seen DeAnthony Melton, go out there as guys that he can kind of model his game after in terms of a role, and I think that's perfect. That's half the battle.
All right, so Zach Edey and Reed Shepard, big time testing numbers. I mean, they did great. Does that change? Does that change your opinion about them at all, or you kind of just where it was? Because I mean, people I think thought of like Klingingen as like a better athlete, but it seems like Zach in the testing at least is a better athlete, and then Reed Shepard with everything he could do as a shooter. I mean, he looked pretty good when it comes to the athletic testing.
Yeah, I don't usually the athletic testing doesn't move me too
Mm,
much in either direction. I think with the Edie thing is interesting because I don't necessarily care how he tests because when I watched the film and I watched, a long sample of games, he's still getting taking advantage of more in a pick and roll and being and having more difficulties covering ground and moving in space than a guy like Donovan Clingan. So I'm always looking for functional athleticism, guys that can actually show it and put it to use on the court rather than, just straight vertical numbers. On any given day, somebody might not be fully warm or whatever the
right.
case is. And, those times can fluctuate a little bit. So I don't necessarily put a ton of stock into that unless it's like just out of the ordinary or something that we just hadn't seen before. Like Keontae George last year, when he went to the combine, he looked way slimmer, moving a lot better, much higher vertical, and that kind of translated its way into summer league and then into the NBA this year. Just things like that. But for a guy like a Zach Edey, I think that that's still kind of a work in progress or still a question mark more than what he tested on the lane agility because he did that stuff well in the past too the other years he was at the combine. So I'm looking more for like the functional stuff.
Biggest winner of draft combine.
Biggest winner of draft combine, I think I would probably go with AJ Johnson,
Yeah.
because he spent the year in the NBL, didn't get much burn at all. He was a 5-star prospect coming out of high school, was initially going to go to Texas before Beard and that situation kind of went down. But yeah, he came out there. He made plays on both days. Looked good with the ball in his hands. Looked a little bit bigger in terms of physicality and being able to handle that. So I think he was one of the biggest winners. Got himself into real draftable conversations. For me, I was a little bit more skeptical just based off of one, some of the difficulties that he had, in high school and kind of just being able to get to spots and things of that nature, but also because we didn't see much of him this entire season. So, yeah, he's one of my biggest winners for sure.
Losers.
Losers. I don't know if I saw anybody who really stood out in that way, in terms of a loser. I felt like everybody kind of, in terms of the measurements and things like that, stood out, or were at least somewhat close to what I thought they would be. So, and in the scrimmages, I thought everybody played mostly their game. So I don't have anybody other than maybe like a Trey Alexander who
Mm.
didn't perform super great in either of those days that I would say is like a big loser.
When we're talking about Zach, what are his biggest improvement areas, and how much upside does he really have at the NBA level?
Yeah, so the thing for me is I'm always going to one, can he make the adjustment offensively to being more of a screen and roll guy, less post up diet, being able to get and make decisions quicker than he has in the past. You know, he's somebody who was liable to spend 5 seconds in the paint on any possession and not get called throughout his college career. So just being able to adjust and to do those types of things, I think that's a little bit easier for him. I think that would be an easier transition. Just is from a mindset and just getting into a program. But the second thing is just being able to survive defensively in the pick and roll. He's gonna drop big. He's not gonna be able to play to the level much. So just being able to survive and hopefully go into a context for his sake that has better point of attack defenders. Otherwise, he may get played off the court easier. So just being able to cover ground, being able to avoid getting blown by when he does have to move out the lane a little bit more. Those types of things is stuff I want to see from him first and foremost. But the interior scoring, just being a mismatch. Dude measured in at 7'4" without shoes, massive. Touch inside. I think that's all stuff that's going to be able to translate. It just might look a little bit different than what he did at Purdue.
Does it feel like Topic is destined to play for the Spurs?
It feels like that's a very great possibility. You know, it seems like they'll highly consider him, whether it is at 4 or 8, where they go wing first or whatever their kind of strategy is in the draft. But I feel like if they're gonna take a guard, I like Rob Dillingham more. I just think that he's capable of a little more. But if I'm thinking of what they're probably gonna go for, he seems like the guy. I just think, you know, a little bit more size, probably be able to survive defensively a little bit more, even though he's not as electric in other ways offensively. But playmaking, the way he kind of moves, even at times, I think that they're gonna take a liking to him for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of prospects, him and Dillingham might be pretty close, but there is more positional versatility when it comes to top pitch. And when you have a player like Wemby, when you really don't know what he'll end up doing, like this guy might be initiating offense a lot at some point, right? Like we really don't know. It feels like Topic could play the 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah, I mean, size wise, he definitely has the ability to survive a little bit more. I think Rob's ability to play off the ball is one of the most underrated parts of any prospects game in this class. So, like, just thinking about a guy that's going to have as much gravity as Wimby, I like his skill set, but also they have the possibility to go get a Trey Young, a Darius Garland, and might go elsewhere in this draft in terms of like creation talent. So, you know, who knows what they ultimately decide, but I think they're going to have a lot of opportunity to get one of those guys and really speed up what you know, this development timeline is for the Spurs.
Do you feel like you're higher on Dillingham than most?
I think so. Probably. I think I'd look past some of his defensive deficiencies at times. I just think that he has something that other people don't in this class, and maybe it is just kind of the lack of those creators, like I was talking about before, that leads me to like him just a little bit more. But I think that he has one of the highest chances to get into that All Star game, just for what he brings on that end.
Super talented, but I feel like from a GM perspective, they might be looking at him as like an undersized guy that just looks to score, right? Is that fair?
I think that's, you know, that's a definite criticism that a lot of teams I know are going to have. I just think, you know, through the role that he played this year, he did a pretty good job of making decisions and making plays. I think that if you give him the keys just a little bit more to work and be able to operate out of the pick and roll, he didn't do a ton of that this year. Kentucky as a whole really didn't. But I think that he's capable of just a little bit more in that aspect. But it's definitely a major question, and the margins are very slim for those small guards to be able to make those higher end impacts. It's really either you are a star, you're able to get to that Garland, you know, Trey Young, I say Mike Conley of you know, 7 years ago or whatever, or you go to that Lou Williams kind of realm, or, you know, further down to Bones Highland and things of that nature. But I think Dillingham has a better chance of you know, making it happen.
Yeah, side note, it's interesting you mentioned Garland with Mike Conley because he might be replacing him eventually. That would be special, right?
Yeah, if I'm Minnesota and I can swing that without giving up too much, I'm definitely
100%. Oh,
taking that opportunity.
they're so elite if that happens.
Yeah, and because you take so much off of Anthony Edwards' play in terms of like creating too, I just think that that would be perfect.
In terms of ceiling, Dillingham or Reed Shepard?
Dillingham for the creation aspect. It's a bigger question with Reed, and that's the reason why I think in some context, or a lot of context, Dillingham just makes more sense. But also, I think Reed has just a little higher floor. He's a little bit bigger, better defensively. Wasn't great, especially at the point of attack. But I think I have more confidence in his ability to like make plays on that end. Like he's just kind of a natural in that way, even with some of the abilities to get to the rim or just create a little bit more. Not being there in the biggest ways. But I think both of them they're pretty close, just for like very different reasons.
Is Reed Shepard just Grayson Allen 2.0?
I think that he's a little bit more talented. I just think that he's a better decision maker.
It feels like he's a better athlete with this testing, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Grayson was a pretty good athlete
He was.
coming out of
He
Duke,
was.
but I think that he would just be able to do a little more than Grayson does in the league.
All right. I wanted to ask you about 2025. I don't know. Is it just that we're trying to contrast what the narrative is around 2024, or is it really all that elite as everybody's saying it is?
It's definitely better than this class. And we could go back in history and say when we were in the 2020 draft, everybody was like, "Nah, let's just get to the 2021 draft. We got Cade, we got
Right.
Mobley, and
Right.
then look what we happens. We got Anthony Edwards, LaMelo, Tyrese, Desmond Bane, even." So I don't think that's gonna happen this year, but I mean the possibility is there. But when you look at guys like Cooper Flag, what he's able to do on both ends of the floor, especially defensively at his size, somebody that looks like a potential All Star in the future. Dylan Harper is one of my favorites. Just a composed point guard with good size, be able to do a lot of stuff next year at Rutgers. You've got other, bigs like Malak going to Duke. We've got Ace Bailey going to Rutgers as well. So there's a lot of talent, a lot more size, a lot more creation upside. Everything doesn't always pan out every single year. Some of those guys will end up being 2 year guys or just late first rounders and things of that nature. But definitely more of what we see in the modern NBA being our current stars than we have in this class.
It would be unfair to compare Cooper as a prospect to like a Wemby, a LeBron James, a Shaq. But do you feel like he's a better prospect than, let's say, a Chet or a Polo?
I think he's in that realm, maybe a little bit of a tier above. I think what he's been able to do defensively at his size is truly special, and his development offensively over the last couple years has been to the level of like a number one pick, somebody that you can have confidence in that aspect. Now, obviously, he'll still have some work to do in his 3 point shot and just being more consistent from out there. But I think that he's definitely at least a tier above them, but like not obviously Wemby. I don't like when we start calling him generational because then it kind of waters down the word. Wemby's generational, LeBron's generational. Everybody else is
Shaq.
below that.
Shaq,
Yeah.
like guys like
Shaq,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned the 3 point shooting, but is there anything else for you that you seem to think is a big improvement area for Cooper?
I think, just becoming a little bit better of a ball handler, being able to handle certain things on the wing, making quick decisions, and just knowing where his spots are at. I think that's going to be interesting to watch next year at Duke, especially playing off of guys like Proctor and, some of the other talent that they've got coming in there that's a little bit older. But yeah, I think that he's going to be able to just get in where he fits in at the baseline, and then we'll just kind of see from there. But I think just seeing where he can get to in terms of his own creation is going to be the thing I'm watching most.
Who's your favorite second round prospect for 2024, or you project to be second round?
Favorite? That's tough. I like a lot of these players, and we start getting into the 30s. I think that's when it starts to get really interesting, and then like the tiers that I'm gonna have on the next board, probably next couple weeks or so. That tier is pretty big, but I would say somebody like a KJ Simpson from Colorado, projected somewhere in those 20s to 30s range, or even the 40s for some people. I just think that he knows how to play. He is smaller, but the way he's able to impact the game, he can get to the rim, he can shoot the three, he can play off ball. He had great numbers this year, nearly 45, 40, 90 splits, somewhere around there. He can defend, he competes on that end as well. I think he's a guy that's going to come in, be be somebody's backup point guard, and potentially, from there be able to even get his starting nod in some spots. I think that he just has enough game to be able to make stuff happen. So he would be one of my main ones.
And when you're thinking about the draft, let's get back to the lottery for a second. Who's your favorite prospect team fit when you were thinking about the lottery? Like you would like to see paired. I remember like I pulled it up today. Like I really like Derek Lively to the Mavs, and we're seeing him as
Hmm.
not to toot my own horn, but which I always do. You know
Oh
that, kid.
yeah,
I always bring out the receipts. You know that, Keandre. But for you, who
I
do you
mean,
like? Who do you like to see? When it comes to prospect fit for a team.
yeah, that was a great one last year. Lively to the Mavs is perfect, and he's
Perfect. Yeah.
he's been killing it.
100%.
Um, I would say we talked about Rob in the Spurs. For him specifically, that would be his best fit, just because when you got a guy like Wemby on the backside, that kind of neutralizes
Yeah.
some of his defensive issues. But I like Donovan Clingan if he was able to land in Memphis, because Jaren playing at the four, those other playmakers that are around him, and being able to just set screens and get things done there. That would be one of my best fits. I think those two would be towards the top of the list, and then everybody else is just kind of in the middle. If Stephon Castle will buy into not being a full time point guard, Charlotte, I like that a lot. Being able to be next to LaMelo and Brandon Miller, making secondary plays, defending at the point of attack. I love that trio. I need him to buy into that to potentially make that happen. So those three.
How have you felt about Charlotte's just the way they've been drafting over the past few years? It just doesn't seem like it's turned out great, even though they got LaMelo and Brandon Miller playing great. It's just like some of the other guys. It seems to be crazy over there, Keandre. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like they've gotten a lot of good players, at least recently. The Mark Williams injury is going to be one to watch. If he can get back healthy, I like their core quite a bit. Um, but yeah, I don't know. When you have those guys who aren't the top tier guys like LaMelo or Brandon Miller, you got a PJ Washington that's a great pick. But the situation that you're in as a team, he ends up becoming a trade chip, or he wants out. He goes to Dallas, immediately ends up making a huge impact on a conference finalist. So that's kind of been their biggest issue. It's just like they need to get into a sort of direction, and I think they've got a great opportunity in this draft. So they've got some decent pieces. Obviously, we can go back Malik Monk. They messed that up. James Booknight and Kai Jones and those. But the last few years, at least last three, I think, I've at least liked their direction a little bit more.
Do you like the idea of bringing in veterans with these rebuilding teams? Because, Houston did it a little bit. Orlando Magic, even with Joe Angles, right? You're bringing a veteran. Do you think they just need a veteran presence there so they could see what winning basketball looks like a little bit within the development?
Yeah, I think that's essential for all winning teams going forward. You got to have that sort of structure. Otherwise, you start to build bad habits. Obviously, losing games builds habits in itself. But just having those guys as even like placeholders for a couple of years to show them the ropes, but also just be able to compete on a nightly basis, I think that's essential. So any rebuilding team has to have some of those guys in place. You look at, like you said, Houston this year getting Fred, Dylan Brooks immediately. It changes things for a Jalen Green, especially, or a Jabari Smith. So that's always the goal.
Can we get great Alpern and great Jalen Green together? You think they can make that happen?
I think it's possible. I just don't, because I like both of them as
100%.
individuals, but the structure of the rest of the team would have to be kind of like we'd have to see Jabari really start to
3 and D. They need 3 and D
take.
around that, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, they need 3 and D. They need some more size. Jalen Green's gonna have to be that guy that we saw him in stretches towards the end of the year
Yeah,
more
yeah.
consistently.
But
I
that's the
think it's
thing.
possible.
That's what I'm thinking. Can you see that with an Alprin kind of
Yeah,
like
right.
running him as a hub, right? Like that's the question.
I think you can if you can get him to make quicker decisions, get to the basket, stop getting to shots that he wants to take, and take the right shots on, or make the right decisions on a certain possession. But I think we're gonna figure that out in this next 30-ish game, 40-ish games. Otherwise, I think they might make a move, or they could have already made that decision. They make some moves this off season, move to a min a little bit more. So I guess we'll see.
So I wanted to end off with a couple of creator topics, right? Keandre, because you've been on YouTube for a while now. You're doing a great job, 50K subs. Have you seen a change in the way YouTube works in terms of what works and what doesn't work? Like what gets better engagement these days? Or you just put out what you love and, you see what happens? Or is there like strategy to it? And how has YouTube changed over the years?
Yeah, so I think for me, my personal strategy or the way that I'm approaching it has always been I will make this stuff with nobody watching. I would make the scouting reports, that Tyrese Halliburton report. I have a screenshot on my phone. It had been like 2 weeks. It had 17 views. It didn't blow up until later on and we got into COVID. Um,
Mm.
so that was always the first approach for me. But like on YouTube, a lot of stuff that's gonna get the most clicks is gonna be something that has some type of controversy, negativity, or
Yeah, true.
clickbait, right? That's been the case for like I would say the last 6 years or so, but it's
Right,
kind of
right.
just been sped up even more. And even like the mock draft that I put out, the reason I think that it does so well, obviously people love those, and that's like the biggest thing in the draft, but the reason, like algorithm wise, being able to comment when you disagree with something or comment when you agree with something, and it makes you have like an emotional attachment to something, is why it drives and it gets more into recommended and all that kind of stuff. The way YouTube's algorithm works, but yeah, negativity, controversy, that stuff is always gonna kind of drive, um, at least in the short term, YouTube views. Where especially in sports, because that's what I'm speaking in specifically. But yeah, I think my approach and the approach of like people who kind of last longer
Yeah.
is and build a real fan base is just doing stuff that you enjoy, your audience enjoys, and kind of sticking to that, finding your niche, and everything else kind of takes care of itself in the end. People end up recognizing it.
One piece of advice you would give yourself when you were starting the channel.
I think that would be to. That's a tough question. That's a good question. Honestly, just to don't care too much about comments. Like earlier on, all the negative comments that I would get, even if it was 100 positive ones, a few negative ones, it would always bother me, like a lot. But over the years, I've kind of, grown thicker skin and I just don't really care as much. But that would be the thing, at least for those like first couple years, especially certain things go viral and all that. But that would be the number one thing I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too nerdy on you, Keandre, but there's an evolutionary reason for that. We see the negative comment because way back in the hunter-gatherer era, we used to have to see the enemy from a mile away, or they would get us. Like everything is good. We don't have to worry about that, right? We used to have to see the enemy from a mile away. So that's why we feel that way. I think it's important to know that so you could realize there's like a reason why we always see the negative comment. But it's like, yeah, you could see like 100 good comments and that one good comment would be like, what's wrong with this guy, man?
Yeah, that stuff used to always. I used to reply to a lot of comments too. And, I get in a whole argument with somebody over something that I was like, I know what my process was, and I know that I watched the games and put the time in. So you just disagree for whatever reason that is. That's fine. That's cool. You watched the video, you enjoyed it. That's cool. That's good enough for me. Going back and forth isn't. I'm not getting anything out of that. So just putting good positive energy out there and just focusing on the things that I can control. That would be for those first couple years. That's what I would say.
Last thing, well, what do you feel like the evolution for you is within your career as being an NBA draft analyst?
Yeah, I think just continuing to get as good as possible in terms of like scouting at the core, learning from mistakes, and just kind of developing new ideas and ways to approach things. That's always been something I've been interested in. And then from like a broad perspective, it's just hopefully getting other opportunities to further what I do, um, and potentially other opportunities in basketball. Maybe not necessarily in the same way that I do it now, but that's kind of the future evolution I would see.
Keandre, keep up the great work. You're always welcome back on the show and talk to. Where can we find you? Let everyone know.
Yeah, for sure. You can find me on YouTube, Hoop Intellect. Got a lot of videos coming over the next several weeks and leading up to the draft, so definitely stay tuned to the channel for all that. And then I'm on Twitter, Hoop Intellect as well, tweeting a lot of different stuff throughout the playoffs and other draft stuff that comes up, topics, all that good stuff. So yeah, Instagram as well. So
Give Hoop Intellect a thumbs up, a share, subscribe. Same thing for the NBA report right here with Combo's Court. Thumbs up, share. I got to do all the YouTube stuff now, Keandre. You know,
Yeah.
I gotta, you know, it's housekeeping. But yeah, give us a thumbs up, share this episode, and talk soon. Thanks, Keandre.
Appreciate it, man.